Give me 10 seconds. Thanks for tuning in to another Life as Larry show or episode, whatever you want to call it. This one is Madam Vice President, the House guest we don't know, Kamala Harris. All right, so Scott Evans, he's from Access Hollywood. He was a host, Access Hollywood. He has a show called House Guests. He recently had former U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris as a guest, who he referred to as Madam Vice President. Now, let's be real. Nobody knows who Kamala Harris is. And even on a national level, sure, people know her name. She was VP, but knowing the name and knowing the person are two different things. And that's the bread and butter of a vote. And that's why Trump won. By that point, folks felt like they knew him for better or worse. The American voter at that moment wasn't who we thought they were. Harris's loss proves America isn't just going to vote for a woman just because she's a woman. Hillary already showed us the country is willing to is willing to back a woman for president. The difference between Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton comes down to one thing: the popular vote. So it's not 107 days. Instead, it's Mariah Carey. I don't know her. We don't know her. On Scott Evans' house guest, Harris, she has her moments. She can be funny and relatable. But honestly, there are more cringe moments than times you feel at home with her. We got more word salad than substance. Most of the time, Scott Evans is carrying the conversation or filling in the blanks while Harris stumbles over herself. Now, that doesn't mean she can't be president, but it does raise real questions about her electability. Being Black or just claiming it isn't enough for Black America anymore. I mean, take Gayle King. I mean, she's Black when it's prime time, and somehow it's off the clock when it doesn't count. That's not identity, that's scheduling. Harris isn't famous for losing to Trump. She's remembered for saying, "We did it, Joe." But in doing that, Biden ended up turning her into a punchline more than a partner. We saw that during the Biden presidency. Now, I'm going to go chapter by chapter. VP's favorite chips. She gifted Scott a bag of Doritos for what he described as his chip drawer. The shot shows a preloaded drawer with 2 bags of Kettle brand crinkle cut potato chips. You gave me a bag of Doritos. Thank you. We are then shared the story about a woman-owned business where Harris used to go buy candles. In short story short, a scent was created in Harris's honor. Her signature scent, she calls it, which consists of jasmine and gardenia. I mean, she was very knowledgeable about the describing of scents and texture of scents. It gets into her favorite fries. When she sees what she described as gorgeous fries, she then tells Scott the story about jars of duck fat. But when she calls it exquisite. And she begins to discuss how she puts gravy on her fries. That's brown gravy, by the way. This is supposed to personalize her. This is establishing that she feels at home, that she's sharing more than what you already don't know about her. She then tells us how she made fries and a steak for Doug. And I quote, "He was in heaven." Harris then, with a mouthful of one fry, goes into a word salad from shoestrings to potato chips. Something's cute. and the rest of the sentence or lack thereof is inaudible. They explore her favorite pizza. Harris enjoys cheese pizza with anchovies, one of her favorites. That's what she said. Not fresh from the water, but from the tin can. That's what she said. Her favorite meal to cook? She loves to host and cook meals. Scott asks Harris, is there a meal that you love to make? And he says, outside of the gravy on the fries. She then proceeds to tell a story, so well put together, about roast chicken. That sounds more like when you're standing in the kitchen watching someone else cook, or either someone has told you the recipe many times. She speaks with her hands the entire time in detail. In fact, you start to pay more attention to her hands, just in case the recipe is lacking. For what it's worth, the recipe sounds delicious. Harris says there's joy in cooking. Scott says he adds Stouffer's mac and cheese to his homemade mac and cheese. And Harris asked, what kind of Stouffer's? You know there's different kinds. Now, there may be different sizes, but Stouffer's makes only one kind of mac and cheese that Black families would ever integrate into or enhance to substitute for making mac and cheese from scratch. Okay. We then go into VP and emojis. Harris self-identifies as a toddler on technology. Most toddlers I know are smarter than me with technology. That's how we know when our kids are smart. I'm saying that, not Harris. She compares herself to a toddler walking as well when it comes to Harris on technology. She now then says she's writing sentences in emojis. I cringed and thought back to when I'm scrolling and I see those posts and reels that say Black people understand anything. Wash chicken. Harris also said you don't need to wash your chicken. That bacteria will be killed when you cook it. So there's no need to splash bacteria all around your sink. Scott jokes, I'm not talking about with Dawn. It's about 9 minutes, 38 seconds in, and he's been playing in her face all along. Honestly, there's no let up. Harris says, it's a common misconception that you have to wash your chicken. Cook versus clean. When asked, the cook should never clean the dishes, Harris and Doug have it all sorted out. She cooks, he cleans. Scott says, and I bet he's good at cleaning too. At about 10 minutes, 39 seconds, Harris talks about her Uncle Freddie, who lived in Harlem. He had a small apartment and loved to cook. He cleaned everything. She said, so now he's a running joke in her family. You got a Uncle Freddie the kitchen. At 11 minutes, 24 seconds through, we get to see more of her personality. When Scott shares he is often not the cook in the kitchen, when he said he is also often not the cleaner in the kitchen. And he adds, because I'm not fast enough. Harris jokes, but seriously asks, are you on purpose slow? If you want to hear anything Kamala Harris has ever said that's even remotely close to a plan, it's at 12 minutes, 18 seconds. Quote, because the last thing you want is everybody hanging out in the kitchen and you got a sink full of dirty dishes. End quote. Now, I can see this as an SNL skit, honestly, right? Harris holding her glass of wine and she looks over at your sink. You don't even notice it. You're busy laughing and talking. And she begins to make that ugh face. Of course, Maya Rudolph would do the honors. She doesn't want to eat in a messy kitchen. Okay, that's why she doesn't clean her kitchen. I'm sorry, that's why she doesn't clean her chicken. I'm sorry, that's why she doesn't clean her kitchen. She cleans her kitchen. She Uncle Freddie's that thing. Dessert first. Oh, yeah. For some time here, they've been playing a game called Match My Mood. The goal here is for Scott and Harris to agree more often so he doesn't have to add additional slices of anchovies to his slice of cheese pizza. Scott embellishes Captain Crunch at any time of the day, at any time of the day snack. And Harris agrees. Absolutely. End quote. Now, I doubt she's digging in a box of Captain Crunch at any time of the day. Just maybe. Maybe. Just maybe. Cooking pizza for VP. At 15 minutes, we get another dose of Harris's personality. She can be petty. She can be funny. Then at 15 minutes, 50 seconds, Scott says, okay, now I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to pull this out now because I think we are more than ready. Harris follows with, wow, that was fast. And they both proceed with, ooh, oh yeah. Finally, at 16 minutes and 19 seconds, we finally hear book in 107 days. Woo! So Scott tries anchovy. Scott asks Harris, what do people call you these days? Harris says, you can call me Kamala. You can call me, I don't know. My team sometimes will say MVP. Scott jokes, Majesty? No, Your Grace? Harris replied, only my family. I asked them to, but they never do. There's that personality again. Then there's this play on equality. It's golden. In Harris's me and my sister Maya moment, she details a fair split. According to Harris, her mother would say, one of you gets to split and the other gets to choose. You have never seen a more fair split in your life, Harris says. Scott then says, equality. And Harris says, totally. Now, back to me, that's not very liberal now, is it? Pun. So finally, Scott tried the anchovy pizza. And just before he bites, he says, I never had fish on pizza. At this point, we're 19 minutes, 19 seconds in. Now, I digress. We're supposed to be getting to know Kamala Harris as a house guest. Now, overall, the experience of watching the Scott Evans house guest episode with Kamala Harris was long and draining, but it was kind of nice to see her. The president called. So in the book, she talks about the first day she got the call that Joe Biden was not going to be running for re-election. Apparently, Harris was eating cheese pizza with anchovy. Anchovies are salty, you know. Now, I remember hearing about how VP Harris was on the phone that same day calling delegates. I remember hearing that on the news. We now know it was to let delegates know she intended to win, and she welcomed anyone else who wanted to jump in. Now, this is on a Sunday. It's been a very long day. So to clarify, in fact, she ordered cheese pizza with anchovy. Not when she got the call, not while on the call, but her first night as a candidate for POTUS, President of the United States. Preparing for the race. At 23 minutes, 40 seconds, Harris starts describing Doug, who she has to say my husband every time. She says he likes now anchovies on pizza, but he likes like sausage and pepperoni. And it sounds like she goes on to say, and all that shit. Kamala Harris has been a district attorney 2 terms, attorney general for 2 terms. She was a United States senator and vice president. She noted all through an election process. Harris said she understood the stakes, not the ones for Doug. And there was complete clarity on that. Oh, yeah, we're talking about preparing for the race. All that Doug, my husband, like all that shit on his pizza might get you lost in this vacuum. Meanwhile, he has much more of his slice gone, and she is sitting with a full slice. This might be her second. All that I love pizza talk, it has to be. Owning her narrative. Scott highlights that Harris's book is not a tell-all, but in essence a journal. Harris was in a get the job done state of mind for 107 days. Scott does more of the talking, about 98.5%, explaining the book, why Harris wrote it and what it is. She is simply agreeing most of the time. Harris finally ironically says that as an historic VP running a historic campaign for president, quote, I was not about to let history have other people tell my story, end quote. At about 27 minutes and 41 seconds, Thing, from the Addams family, appears on her neck. Mental and physical wellness. Harris speaks on exercising every morning, despite how much sleep she's had. And she name drops her pastor, Pastor Brown, who marched with King, who she called for prayer for her team. Now, every time I hear a person say they prayed for the White House, they have lost. All jokes aside, she prayed for support. Kamala and Doug. At 30 minutes, 22 seconds, Scott says Doug. And you know it. At 30 minutes and 40 seconds, Harris says, my husband. Harris does talk about how she's protective and how all the attacks come in over 107 days, assuming she's talking about the campaign attacks and not the book attacks. It put a strain on her marriage. But he has a way of de-escalating, she said. We will not turn on each other, said Doug, according to Harris. What her mom taught her. Kamala says that when she was little, when most mothers would cuddle you and, oh, baby, come here, I'll take care of it, Harris's mom would go, well, what did you do? She eventually realized that her mom was teaching her, you have agency. And what can you do about it? Essentially, it's not about making it that things happen to you. Now, I can relate to this because my mother has always told me things happen for you, not to you, said Larry. But Harris says, in dealing with unfairness and injustices, you have to try and figure out, what can I do about this? She makes sure she highlights that most other times when she's talking about injustice and unfairness, it is not of your creation, but allowing the moments not to disempower you. We cannot let our spirit be defeated, end quote. She also said, we cannot let the darkness that we are seeing, the unfairness, the injustice, the corruption, cause us to freeze. She then says, we cannot allow it to cause us to just throw up our hands when it's time to roll up our sleeves. Sounds like I'm quoting Dr. Seuss. And Scott eats that up as if Harris has made some grand statement. Toughest day of her life. Scott and Harris begin to discuss January 6th, the day Harris had to oversee the certification of the election results. Harris says it was a day of reflection. Scott Evans, quoting from 107 Days, called it the hardest thing she ever had to do. And Harris agreed. I would have rather she stated that herself, said Larry. Here's my problem with Harris. Scott asked her, what was it about the day? And from 36:13 to 36:40, a whole 27 seconds, she's just looping vice president, president, vice president. Like, man, we know your job description. You preside over the Senate, you certify the election. That's not breaking news. 27 seconds in an interview is forever. If I stopped talking for 27 seconds straight, the show is over. And instead of giving us the whew, this day was wild moment, we got the remix of her title. That's not reflection, that's filler. She does, however, tie it back to 4 years earlier on January 6, 2020. She was a U.S. Senator from California and Vice President-elect, she reminds us. And now here she is as Vice President. Harris recalls how during the DNC, at the DNC, there was an active bomb just feet away from her outside the building. Fast forward to 2025, and she says it's non-negotiable for her to stand there and give the certification process the dignity it deserved. Harris points out that real leadership is about the peaceful transfer of power in acknowledging the results of an election. Now, let me just say this. We've got Democrats out here claiming Trump stole the election. True or not, isn't that a contradiction? Said Larry. Now, Harris says her duty was to certify without obstruction. Pioneer out. That's her code name. Now that she's picked that one for herself, she is, in a way, really a pioneer. How? Well, she became the first woman, the first Black woman, and the first South Asian woman to ever serve as Vice President of the United States. She mentions being Black, but never South Asian as a house guest. Agree with her or not, that alone puts her in the history books as someone who just broke ground at the highest level of American politics. Now, here's the thing. Voters questioned whether she was Black enough. And that's the contradiction. White America will vote for a Black woman, but they won't vote for someone they don't fully see as a Black woman. To counter this, Harris shows us that she knows that FAFO, FAFO, means fuck around, find out. And she says she wasn't about to do this. And Scott puts it as she could have easily did what they tried to do. This is the moment we're supposed to embrace her for doing the right thing. The very thing she says she was obligated to do that day. But let's be real. It's the same thing former VP Mike Pence did on January 6, 2020. Harris says she wasn't going to go beneath what she believes everyone should stand for. And she hopes the contrast was clear. But literally, like I just said, Pence certified Biden and Harris's win. Not sure she got that memo, but she's Madam Vice President, right? Harris says it wasn't about turning the other cheek, and she agrees with Scott when he says it's about doing your job, doing what you agreed to do. She adds, and showing what a real American leader does. But I'm not sure what contrast she's trying to make here because, again, Pence certified the 2020 election too. And that was on a day of absolute carnage at the Capitol. Memorable moment from campaign. Harris says one of the most memorable moments from her campaign was at her rallies. Thousands of people showing up, someone asking for a picture, someone else wanting her to hug their child. And at 41:09, 41 minutes, 9 seconds, that is, she tells this story. Someone from the back would hand the baby over through the crowd, pass the baby up, and then pass the baby back. And she adds, the parent trusted the person next to them. End quote. Now I get it, but let's be clear. This isn't exactly unique. Strangers passing babies or even lifting folks through a crowd is common at concerts, protests, you name it. If they had to, people at Woodstock 99 would have tossed a baby forward the same way they tossed bodies towards the medics. Quote, there was something so magical in many ways about that. She called it communal responsibility and community. She says, right now people feel alone and that her rallies were the opposite of that. Telling people about the book. Scott asks Harris if she shared the book with anyone before it was published. And she admits there were a couple people she had to address. He rephrases it, asking was she nervous about sharing her perspective on situations that involved other people. Harris stresses, the book is not a tell-all, but it is honest. So cheers to that, right? Because she really wants folks to go and read 107 Days for themselves. And she doesn't mince words about it in this appearance either. But let's be honest. That's one thing she's been consistent with, right? Giving interviews without much substance. The reason why might be because she says writing the book was cathartic. Holding all that in her head was a lot to hold. See, naturally, she wants people to read it. And honestly, I get it. She says she's never hidden anything, but in the book, she's more candid, sharing more than she ever has. Kamala and Doug on election night. On election night, she and Doug never actually talked about what happened, the loss. Instead, she points to her visit to Howard University, conceding, and her duties as vice president overlapping with the California wildfires. When Scott asks how long it took before she and Doug finally discussed the election results, she admits months, end quote. Sounds like Doug was in witness protection. Harris says she learned the news that the fires were approaching her home in California. Grieving the loss, Scott asks Harris in retrospect how she's managed to keep it together, pushing through not only as vice president, but also as a spouse, a parent, a woman, a Black woman. And that's the version of herself she's presenting in this interview, a Black woman. A Black woman who lost when she should have won. Notice what's missing, the dual identity, Black and South Asian, because to the Democrats, being Black is the true currency. I digress. Anyway, she answers, I try not to let things happen to me. I choose not to live life that way, end quote. Now, I've got to say, that's a philosophy I live by too, said Larry. Harris says she's grieved her election loss, liking it to how she felt when her mother passed. Now, I can relate to election loss, but not on the level Harris explained. I can't imagine what it feels like to lose the presidency, but I can imagine what it feels like to lose. So I do have compassion for her in that sense, but sympathy, that's harder because most voters never really got to know her as VP. I've been a candidate myself, and I'll never forget during early voting in 2018, a supporter of Team 13, a black woman, looked me dead in the eye and said, as loud as she possibly could, I didn't vote for you because I don't know you. I played it cool, but inside I wanted to snap back. And the people you do know aren't doing anything for you. That's what I wanted to say back. At the time, I was running for the Maryland General Assembly as a Democrat. And while I can acknowledge the stakes are much higher when it comes to electing a president, woman or man, that moment taught me something about how voters really think, how black voters really think. Now, for Trump to win in 2024, he had to pull in even more votes across every demographic than he did back in 2016. In 2020, Biden's victory was really fueled by protests against then President Trump, which left Harris stepping into the presidency on the fumes of what some call a ghosted vice presidency. Had she won? Digest that, my people. Harris says she grieved not just the loss of her campaign, but for the country itself more so. But let's remember, Hillary actually won the popular vote. And if there was ever a loss worth of grief, that was it. This wasn't the same. Behind closed doors, a lot of black folks admitted they really didn't know Harris. Yet in the same breath, they'd say she should have won. And I asked why when Hillary lost. Hillary Clinton, someone we actually knew, lost. Not because she was a woman, but because she was flawed in ways Trump wasn't. Let that simmer. With everything we know about Trump, let that simmer. Don't blame the same traits you ran on for the reason you lost. Trump didn't. She lost because the electorate mobilized differently at that moment. Hillary, that is. For her, against her, or for Trump. And like Democrats always say, accept it. Accept that. The results of the election. Harris says that in her loss, she wasn't in a position to protect the country had the outcome gone her way. Digest that. And think back. She ran in 2020, then 107 days in 2024. And still, we never got to know her. Not even as vice president, let alone a presidential candidate. Her time as vice president was greater, longer than 107 days as a presidential candidate in 2024. That doesn't add up to a presidency. This isn't about gender or race. You disagree, you say yes. It's a popularity contest, people. And it's one she continues to lose. Remember, she quotes her mother saying, "What did you do?" But she never takes accountability for grabbing a baton she shouldn't have taken when she did. I honestly believe the Democrats set Kamala Harris up. And while folks are embracing Biden, let's be real, he threw Harris under the bus. You want to talk about busing? He threw her under the bus. He was too prideful to sit out re-election. He should have done it early on. But he didn't want his record tainted by a loss to Trump. So Biden, who was already losing his way, wink, basically said, "You won't Hillary me, but you can Hillary Harris." Scott says it feels like in so many ways, all hell has broken loose. And to resign that's just what it's going to be. It's not enough. It's not okay. It feels like in so many ways all hell has broken loose, and to resign that that's just what it's going to be is not enough. It's not okay. When Harris describes the call, she never says that she took a moment to think about it. I'm not impressed by that. The debate. At 52:23, we get a rewind to Wanda Sykes. I keep thinking about that debate, and the thing that stayed with me is how she was able to call him a motherfucker without calling him a motherfucker. That was genius, end quote. At 55:55, you get a candid glimpse of Kamala silently agreeing with Wanda Sykes. Her facial expressions made it undeniable. This is all while Scott is saying, I can't imagine that's actually where you were in that moment on that stage. I can't imagine. End quote. Now, this I do believe. She really was at that point in that moment. We were saying it, still saying it. Scott says, sipping from his cup. Calling Trump on election night. Harris says she called Trump on election night to concede. Now, mind you, a life-changing moment just happened, and she and Doug, my husband, hadn't had a single conversation about it. But Trump tells her she has a beautiful name and pronounces it perfectly. Scott compares it to a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde moment. Harris says from the start of her campaign, she hit the ground running with, I know his type. And at 54 minutes, 22 seconds, we actually got to see more of Kamala Harris, the person. She's authentic. One of the rare moments in the entire interview. Go and see for yourself. She's not polished, not careful. She's voicing real emotion and testimony, even citing Maya Angelou. And it's fitting. Attacks from within the community. Scott brings up how parts of the Black community pushed back on Harris. And let's be real, we didn't know her. Remember, we didn't know Obama either, but we got to know him. Back in 2008, Obama was the first presidential candidate I could vote for. And during the primary, Hillary Clinton was the first candidate I ever cast a ballot for. I turned 18 in 2007. There are videos on YouTube of me downtown the day before the inauguration and again on inauguration day. So don't play with my name. I'm 36 now. I have a 2-year degree in legal studies, a bachelor's in political science, and a master of public administration and law and public policy. So I can tell you, Harris wasn't it at the time, and she should not have taken the baton. Because here we are, September 27th, 2025, at the time of this show, and we still don't know her. Think about that. You don't know me, but she was vice president. Digest that. Stop this car. Stop acting like she should have won. And I'm not saying this in support of Trump. I'm saying it because just like that Black woman shouted at me, I don't know you. Multiply that. Yes, Black people voted for Harris, but not enough. So don't get mad that some of us thought the way we always think when we don't know somebody. For some, it felt safer to stick with Trump and not vote at all or not vote at all than to ride with someone they couldn't trust in the driver's seat. Black, South Asian, you name it, whatever. Some of y'all talking your big one ain't even get out and vote. However, Kamala Harris says, I believe that God will judge us based on who we are and what we do, not on what other people say about us. Okay, that makes sense. But it's also the kind of typical reply you'd expect. Granted, she's been herself, being herself, and not the overly rehearsed politician she often comes off as. This is one of those moments where she actually sounded natural sitting there off up at Scott Evans' house as a guest. Scott says, I'm glad to know you. We have to have faith, knowing there will be dark moments. And this is a period of darkness, but we also carry light inside of us. And we need to see that light in each other and strive toward it. In summary, Harris. Now, what I noticed was they're careful not to really dive into what the community said about her and continues to say about her. Probably because there's more truth than skepticism. We don't know her. Why she wrote 107 days. Harris says she hopes that by the time readers finish her book, they'll walk away with a sense of hope about the future. So this isn't really about getting to know her. The book, that is. And sure enough, at 57:49, she snaps right back into political mode, up on the soapbox, talking about how she's clear-eyed and believes in the future, Gen Z specifically. She goes full mountaintop on us about how Gen Z is grabbing the reins. And as a millennial, I feel assaulted because we're not done yet. Gen Z taking the reins? Shoot, millennials are still out here paying for the horse. She says, this is our country. We are clear-eyed about the problems, but we love our country. As long as we can hold on to our democracy, we can. But our democracy, in large part, is a function of the power being with the people. So the people cannot give up their power. And when she says this, the grit, the fire, it's real. It feels real. This is her big one right here. And she comes across as worthy, sound, and capable of being president of the United States. But it doesn't last long. There are flashes of this energy throughout the 107 days in real time, but not enough to sustain it. Maybe, just maybe, she had to lose in order to win later. And as many times as she said clear-eyed, she took me back to when I was a little boy and I woke up the next morning to a bunch of news clips of Al Gore saying lockbox. Scott says, if you're able to accomplish everything you did in 107 days with your back against the wall, imagine what you could do with many more days. Now that's really selling her up the river. Because at the end of the day, the joke was on her, and Biden got the last laugh with all that's left of him. And honestly, I'm not sure what was actually accomplished other than raising piles of money in protest of Trump and exposing a fractured Democratic Party. Back in 2008, when I ran as a Democrat, I said it plainly. Our party is broken. I said it then, and now the chickens have come home to roost. But there aren't any eggs, just a mess, said myself. Hope for the future. Finally, the last few minutes of the interview start to sound like a 2028 campaign ad. And again, it misses the mark. She wants you to walk away with a sense of tomorrow, a sense of hope for what could be. She says, things may get worse, better, before they get. Don't accept false choices. She really said things may get worse before they get better, but I wanted to be suspenseful. What'd she say? Now, that's not enough to win. We need to see more of Kamala Harris, not the politician, not the candidate in waiting. She needs content out there where she's just herself, because she excels when she lets go, and she shines when she taps into simply being Kamala. Didn't you learn anything from Hillary? Here's my closing. So here's where we land. Madam Vice President and the House guest, we don't know, gave us a Kamala Harris that's sometimes funny, sometimes relatable, but too often stuck between word salads and polished lines that don't move the needle. Scott Evans tried to give her space. Everyone has tried to give her space. Literally. But she carried less of the interview while he carried more of the interview. And in politics, if you need someone else to fill in your blanks, that's already a red flag. Harris shines brightest in her unguarded moments. When she laughs too hard at a fry, when she talks about roast chicken with her hands, or when she finally drops the script and just speaks like Kamala. But those flashes are too few. If she wants to run again, America needs to see her, not just Madam Vice President. That was the role you played. But who are you? The question isn't if she can lead. I mean, again, her code name is Pioneer. But the real question is whether voters ever get to know the woman behind Madam Vice President. The woman to rise and become president of the United States. Stop this car. Until that happens, the ride doesn't go anywhere.